Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In episode 24, I showed you how to use Azure AD B2C to authenticate any user with an account for Windows, Microsoft, Skype, or Xbox, and then call a secure API from a MAUI app. In this episode, I'll show you how to use Twitter to authenticate your users against their own Twitter account. And as an added bonus, I'll show you how your users can register themselves in your Azure AD B2C account using an email address and password. In subsequent episodes, we'll add support for other OAuth 2 providers like Google and Facebook. But this episode is focused on Twitter. Authentication with Twitter using Azure AD B2C and MSAL is coming right up on the .NET Show. As I said, we're going to start with the last show's repo, which is MSAL Auth in MAUI. But we're going to download this and we're going to rename it to MSAL Social Auth in MAUI. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my repo and I'm going to copy the HTTPS URL and then I'll pull up a command line. I have Git for Windows installed and I'll do git clone, paste that repo. There we go. Now I'm going to rename the directory to MSAL Social Auth in MAUI. Let's pull up SecureWebApi, SLN. So the first thing we're going to do is set the startup project to MSAL Auth in MAUI. That is our MAUI application. And then I'm going to add a couple of packages with the Package Manager console. Make sure that you select MSAL Auth in MAUI as the default project. Okay, the first one we're going to add is Microsoft extensions.configuration.binder. The next one we're going to add is Microsoft extensions.configuration.json. And finally, NewtonSoft.json. So yes, you may be wondering why we're doing all this. We're moving all of the secrets to a config file. So let's add that config file. You could just type appsettings.json, no matter what the item type is, and then just delete the contents. It's the right file name, but if we delete the template stuff, you can use a class for any file type. Next thing we have to do is pull up the properties with F4, and we're going to set the build action to embedded resource. And also copy if newer. I don't know if you need to do that, but I'm in the habit. Now, here's the contents of this file. All right, it looks familiar. We replace the client ID and the tenant ID, and the authority URL also has the tenant ID in it. And the scopes, there is an array, and there's one value that has the client ID in it as well. We'll get to this. Next, we're going to add a new class called nested settings. And there's the code. We're going to need this for settings. And that brings me to a new file called settings.cs. So at this point, we have everything ready to get values from appsettings.json and assign them to the settings class. So we're going to add a couple of using statements to the MAUI program CS file. Right at the top, Microsoft extensions, configuration, and system reflection. So now we're going to use reflection to get values from appsettings.json, and we're going to add a configuration builder to the builder process. We're also going to add our main page as a transient service and make a small change to it. So right here below configure fonts, we're going to insert some code. All right, we're getting the executing assembly. We're creating a stream from that JSON file, appsettings.json file, which is a resource. We're going to create a new configuration builder and add the stream to the JSON file to it and call build. And then we're going to add as a transient service main page. Transient service is essentially a configured instance. that rather than instantiating it in the page, we're going to, because we've configured it, we're going to inject it. Now we have to go to app XAML CS and change this a little bit. See, we're now injecting the page, and instead of saying main page is new app shell, we're just using the page that we injected. Now before we can go on, we're going to create a class for extensions. So it's going to be called extensions.cs. So all this does is takes a nested settings array and converts it to a string array. We're going to need that because we're going to PCA wrapper next. Remember this class? This is the one that had all of our secrets in it. Well, we're now going to refactor this to pull the secrets from the config file. So here in the constructor is before where we put all of those settings. But now we're pulling them from the config file. And we're using them to create our public client application. Now let's go to our main page XAML CS code behind file. Make a few changes here. Now there's one change that we definitely have to make, which is this guy right here. This URL is the URL to our SecureWebApi, and that is not it. So that means I need to go to Azure and I need to get my client ID and my tenant ID and all of these things from the last project and replace them. And just to remind you, I'm going to my Azure AD B2C app registrations, clicking on my app, and right here you'll see the client ID and the directory ID or the tenant ID. So those are what I've copied in. Now I'm also going to go to my Web API project, and I'm going to find the URL over here and copy that in as well. And that goes right here in main page XAML CS. And with all of those details in place, I'm going to run my app. So I'm going up here to select Android local devices, get my local phone, and let's run it and pull it up on the screen. Here we go. I'm going to log in. Got my access token. Now I can call get weather forecast. And there it is. Cool. So we really haven't done anything yet. All we've done is moved all of those secrets into the config file. Okay, the next thing we need to do is add Twitter authentication support. So we're getting ready to add the ability to authenticate our app with Twitter and still be able to call our SecureWebApi. So we're going to start by going to developer.twitter.com. And if you don't have an account, you got to create one. Then you go to this developer portal right here in the upper right hand corner, and here's your dashboard. So we want to go to projects and apps and click on overview, and then we can either create a new project or we can go down to the bottom here and create a standalone app. I'm going to create a standalone app, and I'm going to call it MSAL Auth in MAUI TDNS. Now this TDNS is a suffix that I'm going to use on all of my cloud resources to make it unique. Because MSAL Auth in MAUI was used when I was creating this the first time, so I can't use that again. So come up with a suffix like your name or your company or something like that, and we're going to be using that suffix in the rest of this project. So MSAL Auth in MAUI TDNS is the name of my app. I'm going to hit next. Next, you're going to be taken to the keys and tokens where you can copy the API key secret, and the bearer token and put them in a safe place. So in order to provide authentication support using Twitter, we need to set up OAuth 2.0a authentication. So we're going to click on Setup. The app permissions will stay read. We're going to be able to read. The type of app will be a native app. And now this is where it gets tricky. we need the URL to the up-and-coming B2C app registration, which we're going to configure here with our suffix. So it's going to be MSAL auth in MAUI with our suffix, which is TDNS. And I probably don't need it capitalized, TDNS. .b2clogin.com/MSAL auth in MAUI TDNS. .on-microsoft.com/b2c_1_twitter_susi/oauth1/authresp. This is the callback URI. Very important. Now you want to put your website, whatever it is, for your organization. I'm putting the .netshow.com in there. Now click Save, and we have a couple more secrets. Now these are the OAuth client ID and client secret. These are not the API key and API secret. They're different. All right, so I'm going to copy these off and click Done. Yes, I saved it. Now, in the last episode, episode 24, we went straight to Azure B2C and created a new app registration. But for social authentication, we're going to need to create a new tenant so we can take advantage of Azure's identity providers to allow social network authentication support, including Google, Twitter, Facebook, Apple, and others. So we're going to create a new Azure AD B2C tenant. So I'm going to go to Create a Resource from the hamburger menu, and I'm going to search for Azure Active Directory B2C. There it is. Now I'm going to click Create, and we want to create a new Azure AD B2C tenant. You want to make sure you select Azure Active Directory B2C, then go to Configuration, and we have to put in all our details here. The organization name, I'm going to call the .NET Show. Now the initial domain name is going to be MSAL auth in MAUI plus our suffix, which is TDNS for me. You use yours. Got my subscription and my resource group, and now I can create. Validation passed. Create. And if all goes well, you'll see this message: tenant creation was successful. Click here to navigate to your new tenant, the .NET Show. And here we are. Now, just as before, we're going to click on App Registrations. New registration. The name is going to be MSAL auth in MAUI with your suffix. Supported account types will be accounts in any identity provider or organizational directory for authenticating users with user flows. The redirect URI, we have to select the public, client, native, mobile, and desktop. And for this redirect URI itself, we have to go back to the code, main activity CS. And we have this Android redirect URI right here. Well, this was for the old one. We're going to change this. So the first thing I'm going to do is add my suffix. And then I'm going to replace this with a new GUID. How do you do that? Go to Tools, Create GUID, Copy. Doesn't matter which one you select here. Copy into the clipboard. Paste it here, and then take out everything that isn't the GUID. And while we're at it, I'm going to take out the dashes. Okay. This is my new redirect URI, which I'm going to paste right here. Now you have to make sure this permission is granted, and then I'm going to say register. Now you notice that a new client ID and tenant ID are generated, so I need to copy those and apply them in the appsettings JSON file of the SecureWebApi project. Now I'm going to go to authentication. Now I'm going to check off both of these redirect URLs or URIs. I'm going to scroll down and change this allow public client flows to yes and save. And now I'm going to click on add a platform and it's going to be web. This looks familiar, doesn't it? For this redirect URI, I actually need the URI or the URL to my SecureWebApi and then the suffix sign in OIDC. And there it is. MSAL SecureWebApi pwop.azurewebsites.net/signin-OIDC. Now I want to check off both of these tokens just as before and then select configure. Now there's one more thing we need to do. In the Twitter developer portal, do you remember this API URL right here? We're going to need that as our callback URL, and we're going to add that URI right there. Make sure you click save. Next, we're going to go to certificates and secrets to add a new client secret. And this will be MSAL auth in MAUI T D and S. Remember to use your suffix space secret and whatever time you want to expire. Now it's very important, if you remember, to copy this value right here out of the secret, and that's going to go into your SecureWebApi's app settings JSON file right there. Next, we're going to go to expose an API. I'm going to click on add a scope. And before we can add a scope, it's telling us we need to set an application ID URI. We've chosen one, but you can change it. So just save and continue. Now we're going to add this scope, and our scope name is going to be access as user with underscores. For the admin consent display name, we're going to say call the SecureWebApi endpoints. And for the admin consent description, allows the app to call the SecureWebApi endpoints. And add the scope. Next, we need to go to API permissions. We're going to add a permission in My APIs. There's our API right there. We're going to keep delegated permissions here and allow access as user, and then add permissions. All right, so you see this down here, not granted, permission not granted. You have to do grant admin consent for the .NET show. And once you do that, now we're ready to rock. Finally, we're going to go to branding and properties. I'm going to get the domain name right here and copy it into the clipboard. And that goes here in my domain. And mine is MSAL auth in MAUI tdns.onmicrosoft.com. I'm also going to change the instance from login.microsoftonline.com to MSAL auth in MAUI with the suffix .b2clogin.com. And just for completeness, I'm going to add a couple more sections. And the DownstreamApi, I'm going to replace with my SecureApi URL. Okay, now back in the Azure portal, I'm going to go back to my Azure AD B2C, and I'm going to click on Identity Providers and select, guess what? Twitter. Now for the name, I'm going to call it Twitter because that's what it is. Now this client ID and client secret are the API key and API key secret, the first two values that we copied out of our Twitter screen. They are not the OAuth client ID and OAuth client secret. Okay, once you got that, hit save. Next, we're going to go to user flows, and we're going to add a new user flow. And it's going to be a sign up and sign in, and we're going to use the recommended version option. So the name of this will be Twitter_SUSI. SUSI. We're going to allow local accounts by email. And what this does, it allows our social login users to create local accounts in our AD B2C. They get authenticated, and then they have access to our app. Not only can we authenticate with Twitter, but we can allow users to create their own accounts with email and password, and they'll be in our users. So I'm going to select Twitter. This is very important. Make sure email is the selected type for multi-factor authentication. We don't want to enforce it. We want to let people use it if they want. Now, you see this user attributes and token claims right here. We're going to click Show More. And over on the right, they all pop up. And we're just going to collect the display name. And that's it. Now hit Create. Now before we can test this user flow, we have to republish the SecureWebApi because we've made some changes to that. Now we can test this by clicking on the user flow, click Run User Flow, and drop down Access Tokens. You want to set the resource to our MSAL auth in MAUI with your suffix. Everything else should be fine, and then select Run User Flow. Now I'm going to get this guy. I'm going to sign in with my social account, Twitter. Yay! So now we can authorize the app. This is my Twitter account, and I'm authorizing this application. And this is all good. Now we have to go back to the appsettings.json file in our SecureWebApi application. And right under Client Certificates, we're going to add this. Sign up, sign in policy ID. And it's going to be B2C_1_Twitter_SUSI. And now we need to republish. So now we're going to add Twitter authentication support in the MAUI app. Since our PCA wrapper is going to change in the way we call Azure AD B2C, and to keep things separate, we're going to create an interface and then create a new class called PCA Social Wrapper. So there are ways that you can extract an interface, right? But I'm just going to add a new class called iPCA Wrapper. And there you go. That's all you have to do. Now we're going to go to PCA Wrapper and implement iPCA Wrapper. Now I'm going to copy and paste or duplicate this PCA Wrapper class. And we're going to call it PCA Social Wrapper. We need to change the class name and the constructor. Now I'm going to update PCA Social Wrapper with the code from the repo, and for now you can ignore these compiler errors. Next, I'm going to go to main page XAML and replace that markup with what is in the repo. Notably, we're changing the regular login button to say login with Microsoft, and we have a label to log in with your social account, and here we're going to say login social, and you'll see why. Finally, we're going to update the main page XAML CS file. So we're creating our social wrapper right there, and we're handling the login button. We're also calling the SecureWebApi, and right here we have to replace this with our API URL. There's my current API URL, MSAL SecureWebApi pwop.azurewebsites.net. And now we're going to update the settings class, which means we have to add more stuff to the appsettings.json file in the MAUI app. So I'm going to replace this with my client ID, the client ID here, and all the places where my suffix is, such as here. You can put your suffix. Mine is TDNS, the .NET show. And finally, the tenant ID. Now let's run it. Make sure you're logged out. Go ahead and log out. Now go to Login Social. Sign in with your Twitter account. We'll get back to this in a minute. Click Twitter. Redirecting. There you go. Now I can continue. There's my access token. And I should be able to click Get Weather Forecast. There it is. All right, now let's log out. I'm going to show you something very cool. If I go to Login Social, I have the option to sign in with an email address. Don't have an account? Sign up now. Now this will be a user in your AD B2C directory, right? So this isn't a Microsoft user or any other user. This is your user. If they want to sign up with an email and password, they can do this. So I'm going to enter carl@pwop.com for my email address, because that's another one of my email addresses, and click Send Verification Code. Now I'm going to check my email for that code and paste it in here. Verify the code. Yay! So now I'll create a new password. Very secure password. P@SSWORD1. Display name Carl Pwop. Don't want to use LastPass. There we go. Now we acquired a token. So now I can log in with that email address. There we go. Now if I go back to my Azure AD B2C account and I go to Users, look at there I am, Carl Pwop right there. And I can manage the user. I can revoke access, I can reset the password, all of that stuff. So there it is. That's the end of my demo. Not only did we figure out how to use Twitter to authenticate, but if you're using Azure AD B2C, your users can register themselves with an email address and password. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazertrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.